Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ishai, and here we go into what are the key things you need to know that's happening in the AI space right now in order to be prepared to implement the right things and to tune out the noise that you don't need to know. There's a lot of shenanigans and noise in this space, and a lot of it's just hype. So we try to dive in and show you what actually matters. So today we've got several interesting stories. Let's dive right in. Now, first thing up is this issue of Claude versus OpenAI on the case of auditing code. So a lot of users have noticed that OpenAI, that ChatGPT, is much better at doing a QA of your code. And Claude, it tends to be, will tell you everything looks great and deploy it. And OpenAI will actually go through and find specific issues and list them and show what's wrong with them and really help. But one user on X uncovered, his name is Patel5, OM_Patel5. He uncovered that if you actually take the Claude prompt and put it into ChatGPT, other way around, the Codex prompt, the ChatGPT Codex prompt, and put it into Claude, that Claude can do just as well as uncovering those issues. So somebody was actually able to extract the instructions from Codex that it uses when doing this QA and feed it into the Claude system with the same prompt, and you get much better results. And this is specifically for code review. So the problem is that Claude is very polite and just doesn't look as deeply, but it's really all in the prompt. And this gets me to a bigger story that I want to talk about, which is this issue of LLMs sort of hitting a wall. What we're seeing is that the raw intelligence of LLMs is slowing down how fast they're improving. And what's really making a difference is prompt structuring, tool calling, and really the application layer for how these tools work. So like in Claude, for example, when you do a chat, it's very good at detecting what it should do with that chat. So if I tell it to make a document, it first dissects what it thinks I'm talking about, what it needs to know, and it essentially calls a series of sub-agents that go and execute those things. And so from the user perspective, I'm just sitting here watching it think and show me what it's working on. And it goes through a series of agent calls to actually produce me the result. Now, the real breakthrough here is in how it's programmed, in how it's prompted, and how it does tool calling, and it really is application level programming. So what we're seeing is that just the pure intelligence factor of LLMs is slowing down, and the gains are coming from the different tooling. And there was a great graphic that was released by METR recently that has to do with this, which basically shows that as we go further and further with intelligence, it's essentially just taking longer and longer for the LLMs to complete tasks. And so again, it's not about raw intelligence, it's about it actually going through more stages of thinking to actually arrive at the result. So it's pretty interesting, and I think that this is where we are headed. I generally don't believe that LLMs will become, in a sense, super smart. I mean, they're already trained on a vast amount of data. The technology is already there. I don't think more training is going to lead to a better and better result in the way we usually think about it. Now, there is going to be like recursive training where it trains itself and improves itself. But I do think that most of the improvement is going to come from the application layer, from how these things are programmed to call different tools and different agents as they go along. Now, this is not a small thing. This is huge. If you have the right structure of data, if you have the right structure of tool calling, you can get extremely incredible results. Another example is Microsoft Copilot recently announcing that they're going to have like a 2-tiered system of performing work. If you ask it to create a document, it'll have OpenAI create the document, and then Anthropic, Claude, review the document. And just by doing this, you improve your results drastically. So this also raises another point, which is, are we going to see more and more world of like multi-LLM coordination? And how is this going to affect the LLM companies themselves, who really need to keep people inside the LLM, and they need to win on the application layer in order to get the valuation they need based on the investment they've received? I mean, you've had hundreds of millions of dollars invested in these companies. They have to turn a substantial revenue. They cannot afford to become one of several LLMs that are called by different applications that all compete on price and are driven to the bottom of pricing. They have to win on the application layer. Claude has executed that very well recently with Cowork, with Claude Code, and all the integrations that they've released. It's incredible what they've done. And the user experience of using it is just amazing. But are we going to see a case where people are going to move to other applications that use different LLMs for different specialties? Are you going to have more specialty LLMs where maybe you have an initial model that is smart enough to call other models based on what you're doing? So like you could be talking with maybe a local model that is mainly your interface and everything's handled locally, but then it knows, oh, this person wants to write code. Well, this is a specific, UX and design that they need to work on. And so we're going to call this model that's really strong in UX and design. Oh, now they need like a database connection and they need a lot of backend architecture. Well, this model is much better at structuring the backend architecture. We need somebody to manage this whole project. We need an agent to manage that. This model is really good at managing this multi-agent coordination of a whole software application development. So we'll call that model, and coordinating all that stuff together. It seems to me like that's just where we're going to be headed. I mean, you can already do that a lot with OpenClaw if you set it up properly. And why not? Why not, right? I mean, each LLM can be probably more cost effective if it's focused on a narrower field, a narrower subject matter field, and can be more efficient, more effective. So probably we're headed in that direction. And it'll be interesting to see how some of these companies pivot. To be honest, I couldn't see a problem with at some point Google deciding that they're going to turn their whole Gemini UX layer, like the part of the Gemini product that you actually interact with as a customer or as an enterprise, that they're just going to turn that into an application that calls different LLMs, because that's kind of the Google psychology, the philosophy, I should say, where they're pretty agnostic about boxing you into their infrastructure. I mean, they're happy to just get the user in there and to sometimes do things that in other business contexts wouldn't make sense and open source things. And, they're already doing that with Google Gemma, I think it's called, which is available like on iPhone and other places, which is a local model. So I could see a case where they would say, listen, we'll make a play for the application layer. We'll execute that really well. And if you want to use Gemini, go ahead. If you want to use something else, go ahead. No problem. And they're such a big company, they could easily repurpose their data centers if they wanted to scale back Gemini. So, they don't need to win specifically on the LLM race. What's more interesting is like what's going to happen with Claude, because they have to figure out how to probably keep people in Claude. I mean, it's going to be pretty unlikely for them to make a similar decision because their entire business is based around their LLM. So are they going to be able to develop such a compelling application layer that you don't care about being LLM agnostic? You just use it because it works so well. I don't know, because it's interesting. The same argument people make against developing software, because they say, listen, why would you develop software right now? Because the moat for software is dead because you can just vibe code things so quickly. And that argument tends to be that Anthropic or OpenAI are going to eat your lunch. They're just going to do the same thing that you did. If it's compelling enough, if you have enough users, they're just going to deploy the same thing, but they're going to do it with their whole infrastructure on the back end, and you're going to get destroyed by them, and they're bigger. So that's kind of the argument. What's interesting is you could turn that argument around and you could say, well, wait a minute. What about Claude? I mean, they're developing amazing UX. Like I mentioned, Claude Cowork and Claude Code and just the whole way the chat interface works and all the integrations. Okay, but what's to stop another software company from saying, we're just going to copy that, but we're going to enable you to call any LLM you want, not just the Anthropic LLMs. And even more than that, you could use local LLMs. And then we're talking about saving money, we're talking about privacy. So there's a lot to unpack here. Like, where is this going to go? I think that's the direction that we will head in. And I think that these LLM companies, as a business model, are very vulnerable. I think they're very, very vulnerable, and potentially more vulnerable than software, believe it or not. Now, this gets me to a great story to transition into, which has to do with the OpenAI valuation. So recently, the CFO, Sarah Frier, expressed concerns that the company's plan to spend $600 billion on infrastructure could be problematic. She's concerned about that. And they really have a real problem here because they're having so much investment behind them. The only way they can really raise the amount of money that they need to keep pushing the valuation higher is with an IPO. Maybe. I mean, if it's not true now, it will be true very soon. I mean, to raise that amount of money on the private market is getting more and more difficult, obviously. And eventually you have to IPO. The problem is that they're really not ready to IPO. They have a pending lawsuit with Microsoft. Maybe when I say pending lawsuit, I should specify that Microsoft is considering suing them because of broken agreement, broken contract, where OpenAI started to offer their models through Amazon and not simply through Microsoft Azure. They started to offer them through Amazon AWS. And this directly violates the contract in place with Microsoft, where Microsoft invested huge amounts of money into OpenAI that said that all LLM calls to OpenAI had to go through Microsoft servers exclusively. So they basically violated that. They're trying to be playful with the interpretation, but it seems like they did violate the spirit of the agreement, if not directly the letter. And you can't IPO when you have this pending potential litigation. And basically, they're really not ready for that level of scrutiny. So this could be an issue for them. So pretty interesting to keep an eye on where these companies head in terms of valuation and finances. Now, let's pivot a little bit and talk about OpenAI and how they plan their company, because I think it's super interesting. So Peter Yang has a tweet basically looking at a recent video where there was a discussion with a couple members of OpenAI. Let me tell you exactly who it was. It was Alex and Romain. So Alex is the product lead for Codex, and Romain runs developer experiences. So Peter Yang interviewed them, and what they had to say is that they basically don't do a roadmap. And I think this is really interesting because it seems to me like this is where companies need to be today. And I think it says something about the nature of how work is evolving with the AI landscape being what it is. And how it works is that basically in the near term, like over the next 4 to 6 weeks, you can develop many, many things and bring them to market so fast with the fact that AI can write so much of your code. And that time frame is great for, planning and launching new products. You're talking, 4, 6, maybe 8 weeks, where it used to be, 6 months or a year. So that's one way that you can focus. And this is exactly what they were saying. And then the other way is like a long-term vision. Where do we see things 1, 2, 5 years down the road? And so they plan on both of those points. They have the super short-term focus and they have the long-term focus. And to me, it just makes intuitive sense. And I think that's where we're headed. And I think that's how you have to build in the age of AI if you're talking as a company, right? If you're an individual solopreneur, you can kind of build however you want. But still, it's probably still applies. And I think it naturally applies when you're a solopreneur. You kind of naturally do this anyway because you try to execute really fast and bring something to market. But then you're also kind of keeping an eye on, okay, how am I going to be competitive in a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road? So the whole idea of a roadmap of like this 6 to 9 month cadence is sort of this awkward in-between zone. And this is exactly what they were saying in the interview. It's this awkward in-between zone where it's like a little too far out to be executing now, but it's not far enough for you to really be able to think about it as like the future and where we're headed. It's not far enough out to be like the vision of where we want to be. So I just thought that was interesting. I want to bring it up for those of you that are builders out there or running companies or just really interested in how software is being developed today. That's probably good advice to focus on the short term and then focus on the long term and keep both of those things in mind. Another story is I always have trouble pronouncing his name, as I know many people probably do. Chamath Palihapitiya. He had to say a very interesting question that raises a very good point about the current state of AI for personal work, which is he says that I can't find a good way for my various AI chats to automatically sync its conversation history into a structured knowledge base. This is exactly right. So when we look at memory as it exists in like ChatGPT and Claude, it's always seemed not very good to me. And I engineered something myself, an OpenClaw. And when I say engineered, I'm not a developer. I vibe coded it. It works, but I think the thinking behind it is pretty sound. It's pretty simple, which basically is to have like a managed knowledge base and to have some logic in how that knowledge base is updated. And the problem here is, these memory layers are the memory as ChatGPT and Claude have implemented them are very opaque. They're not transparent. You don't really see those memories. I know you can technically pull them up, but there's not enough clarity in how memories are being created, when they're being created, and when they're being called. It's the calling that's very not transparent. So you really need to have a way where memory is like something that is done semi-manually, or you need a really smart system that archives and stores it properly in a database that you can actually look at and edit and modify. Because the whole question is like, when do you actually create the memory and when do you call it? If I'm chatting with ChatGPT today, I don't necessarily want it remembering something that I said 9 months ago that isn't even relevant. And the way that these applications choose what to remember, it makes no sense. It'll just remember something because like you're working on it once and it's like, okay, that's a memory now. And then it can call it at some point in time. But what you really need is simply a system that stores the work you're doing in a database, that stores summaries of that work in another table, and then references that table whenever you're doing work. So I think every single prompt, you need that question, you need whatever's in the prompt you need to quickly scan like the summary database and understand if there's any context in there that you could pull. And then if there is, then you can go further into the sub database and look for it. But currently the applications, like you kind of have to force them sometimes multiple times to search through the chat history. And it just seems like something that could be done much, much better. It seems like conceptually not that difficult to piece together, okay, let's store all the work that we're doing in a structured way where you have like a hierarchy of the depth of information. So you have, it's kind of the same way that you would ever set up like a knowledge base yourself if you really curated it properly, which would be like, okay, I'm talking about everything related to mindset, or I'm talking about everything related to development. And so those are like my top level topics. And then inside of those, maybe I have, 10 or 20 subtopics. And then inside of each of those, maybe I have like short summaries of different things that I've talked about. And then when you go to the summary, it goes further down. And now maybe I have very detailed, long conversation. Because you can't have AI look at all of the context that's ever been stated every time you ask it a question. But if it connects what you're saying to a topic or a project and then goes another level down and connects it to, these subtopics and then the summary, you could really recall information much, much more efficiently, that you could naturally build like a bank of knowledge that's essentially surfacing context properly at all times into your AI whenever you're talking with it. And the other challenge is then determining like what is current versus what should be archived or like has been overwritten, right? Because maybe 6 weeks ago, I said that I really need to be working out at the gym 5 days a week. But maybe 2 weeks ago, I set my schedule up in a way that I'm working out 2 days a week. So like the AI needs to be smart enough to recognize that that's a decision shift and to surface that in such a way when you're talking about working out now that it's connected to the right current information. And that's a big challenge. So I think I should probably stop talking about this at this point before it gets too in the weeds. But I think it's really interesting to think about who can develop this like self-optimizing, self-updating knowledge base. And again, I think this is a play for a software creator. And of course, Claude or OpenAI could probably execute something like that as well. But it'd be nice if it was LLM agnostic, if it could be deployed on local models, etc. OpenClaw is probably the closest thing that gets to that. You can do something like that. Like I said, I engineer something like this myself for my own personal use. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think that's kind of where we're headed, is this self-updating knowledge. But a lot of these things, this gets back to the first thing I was saying, is like a lot of these types of things are not pure LLM intelligence. They are context management. They are happening on the application layer. And this is where we're going to see the big breakthroughs in usability. Because if this existed, it would be incredible. But whether or not it exists is a question of software and decisions that are made in that software and the application layer, not just the raw intelligent ability of the LLMs themselves. And this brings me to another story, which is this whole idea of AI wrappers. I mean, a lot of people say, like, don't create a AI wrapper, or they'll make fun of startups that they'll say, you're just like a wrapper for ChatGPT or something. But in some cases, it really is true that, if you develop a company that, at one point recently I was using like a headshots.io, I think it was called, or something like that, Headshots Pro. And basically you could upload your photos and then it would turn them into like professional headshots using AI. And it was pretty cool. And at the time it was sort of beyond anything you could do with any normal image editor. But now that like ChatGPT or Gemini or even Claude maybe, but certainly Gemini and ChatGPT and Grok, now you could easily do that and you could customize it a lot more, and it's just much more user-friendly. You just upload a photo, you say, hey, make this look like a professional headshot, put me in a nice tux, put me in a restaurant, whatever you want, and it'll do it. So there's no reason to use Headshots Pro anymore. So this is true for this type of business where there really is no defensibility and no moat, because all you're doing is just wrapping it. But if you develop a software where you're making specific decisions regarding the database and how information is stored inside a database, how that information is referenced and surfaced through AI or connected to the AI when people talk to your AI system or do whatever the software is designed to do, and how you do tool calling and how the UX works. Is it a chat interface? Is it a different kind of interface? If you plan all of those in a specific way, you have a really defensible product. And this whole notion that whatever software product you build now, it's all going to be destroyed by Anthropic is so ridiculous, because Anthropic can't make the same decisions that you make to serve a certain market or a certain segment of the world. They have to keep their product very broad for all sorts of use cases, not opinionated, open to anybody to use in whatever way they want, open to engineers to build on top of and develop on top of and things like that. They can't afford to make these same decisions, and they really have a limitation with how they can manage and store data, because people don't want Claude being both the LLM and storing all of their data and everything in many cases. So, if it's just simple memory and things like that, that's fine. But when you even do like a tool connection to Claude, like your Gmail or something like that, everything stays in Gmail. It lives there, right? They don't take those and copy them and paste them into, Anthropic database. But this is where you have defensibility if you're building software, is choose, start with UX, of course, choose how the user is actually going to interact with a tool. And then choose, okay, the AI now is going to get this information from the user. What is it going to do with it? How is it going to call different tools? Are we going to call different LLM systems or stick to one? Are we going to allow local LLMs? Where are we going to store different data that we're working with in order to execute whatever the service is designed to execute? And how are we going to store it and how are we going to access it? And all of that, all of those decisions are where your defensibility lies. And there really is a lot of opportunity and room in the software space for you to make those decisions and execute them well. So I want to end with that, leave it at that. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let me know in the comments if there's a big story you wished I talked about that I missed, or also give me your feedback and response. It's still a young channel. I'd love to hear how you think it is, and if there's anything you think should be done differently, different topics, different stories, different format, and et cetera, et cetera. So I hope to see you again. We'll probably do another episode later this week. If not, it'll be next week, and we'll see you there. Thanks for joining.